Hello, and welcome to this edition of Inside Today's Boardrooms, presented by Diligent Institute, your source for the latest and greatest in corporate governance, all in 10 minutes. I'm Dottie Schindlinger, Executive Director of the Diligent Institute, and I'll be your special guest host, standing in for Lisa this week. I'm joined today by Matt DiGiuseppe, Managing Director of PwC's Governance Insight Center. Matt, thanks so much for joining me today.
Of course, I'm always excited to talk to you, Dottie.
So I know that PwC recently put out new insights based on their global investor survey. So tell us a little bit more about that survey and what you learned.
Sure. So, for the past several years, PwC has conducted a survey of global investors. And this year we had approximately 350 respondents, a little half of whom were those that invest in U.S. companies. We recently published our take on the U.S. investor views, and I think there's important insights for boards to consider, especially when they think about what's important to investors when making their investment decision.
Great. So let's start there. What are investors looking at beyond the traditional financial performance topics?
So I think we all know that markets are made because investors form their own opinions about more than just the company's financial results when deciding whether or not to buy, sell, or hold a security. But understanding what they're forming their opinions about can actually help the board when engaging with management to make sure they're getting their information to the market that they're looking for. So when we asked investors about what topics were most important to them, excluding financial performance, like you noted, I don't think you'd be surprised to hear that corporate governance and management competence rose to the top, right? Those are well-trodden areas. But next on the list are innovation and emerging technologies, which might be surprising, but our recent global CEO survey also found that 45% of CEOs don't think that their companies will be viable in 10 years if they simply remain on their current path. So you actually see a really interesting agreement and alignment in the market in terms of the expectations around innovating and looking to new opportunities. And finally, climate rounds out the top five of those topics that are considered, which I think is actually a really important reminder for boards in this current environment that investors are going to look at what they think impacts a company's financial performance, regardless of sort of what's happening in society more broadly. They have that laser focus, and this is still very much something that they're considering in their process.
I thought one of the more interesting questions that you asked in the survey is about where investors get that information from. So what surprised you about what you learned?
Yeah, so this is interesting, right? Because when you ask about where investors look for information, we give them a really diverse list of 10 topics that range from the traditional financial statements to things that are less traditional, like materiality assessments. And on that list of 10, not one of the identified sources was used by less than 80% of respondents. So they really are going broad in terms of what they're looking at. And this is where I leave a little bit of curiosity around sort of going into clicking the link to find out the full list. But what I also highlight is that the diversity of sources is increasing. So investors are either looking to more sources or new and additional sources. One of the sources, obviously, that we put on the list is around sustainability commitments. But we separate progress towards and targets from the sort of disclosures more generally. And more investors are looking at that progress towards targets and what your targets are over sort of the general disclosure, which aligns with what I think you're hearing a lot in the market, which what matters is what you're doing and how you're going to do it, more so than just sort of the traditional goal of put as many data points out in the market as you possibly can. And as a board member, that's something that you can bring to your discussions, right? You can say, okay, this is great that we have all this data, but how do we connect that back to sort of what we're doing as a business and understanding the economic impacts of the investments that we're making?
Do you get a sense that they trust all of those sources equally, or maybe what their expectations are around, the data quality that they're looking at?
Yeah, I think this is another area where boards can lean in, because we asked about trust in using investor-focused communications to assess how companies are managing the risks and opportunities that are facing their business. And only 51% said that to a large or very large extent, they trust those sources. So there's definitely some skepticism out there. And I think not surprisingly, because everyone wonders about sustainability and greenwashing, right? It drops to 41% when you ask about that data. And the question is, what can we do about it? So investors certainly agree that assurance can play a role in increasing trust, and that's certainly true of financial statements. And we're marching to that sort of regime, if you will. And this is where I put in the plug that, if you don't know definitively which parts of your business might be subject to CSRD or in scope, or you don't know what those four letters mean, then please raise that at your next board meeting. But even as the assurance landscape sort of evolves and moves around in the coming years, the board can lean in on the process controls and governance structures that are in place around all of the disclosures that an investor might use, with a focus on consistency, quality, and accuracy. And that's certainly the board's role. We definitely see audit committees leaning in on that topic and get involved there. So I think what you can take from the survey overall is, as a board member, there's a lot of information there that you can use to continually improve the way that you engage with management.
Well, Matt, this report is just exceptionally interesting. I think there's a lot for people to read through and chew on. So, the most important question I have for you is, where can we find a copy?
Well, if you Google PwC investor survey, that's probably the fastest and easiest way. Or visit the Governance Insight Center site specifically for the whole host of our library of materials.
Excellent. Matt, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been really great speaking with you.
Yeah, really a pleasure as always, Dottie. Loved it.
You can check out the findings from the Global Investor Survey on PwC's website, and we'll be back soon with another installment of Inside Today's Boardrooms. Thank you so much for joining us.